The Court of Public Opinion is a part of the Amateur Radio Network.
Come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the subcommittee at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on combating crimes against children. And I will recognize myself for an opening statement. Then I will recognize the gentleman from Michigan. Then the chairman of the full committee, if he is able to make it. And then we will begin our questioning. So I want to thank each of you for being up here today. Today's hearing addresses one of the most difficult issues for people of good conscience to contemplate: the exploitation of society's most innocent and vulnerable, which would be our children. Public safety is the preeminent function of government, and even among the preeminence of this function, protecting those who cannot fully protect themselves is most important. Today begins our process of examining current laws pertaining to the exploitation of children and to evaluate the effectiveness of these laws and work together across every proverbial aisle that exists to make sure our laws are as tough and effective as possible. Amend where needed, strengthen where needed. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, but more importantly, for every day other than today, while you are living out your commitment and dedication to combating and preventing child exploitation and abuse. No longer is it simply physical proximity that puts our children in danger. The internet and other things have created an alternative world where sex offenders can easily and sometimes surreptitiously exploit our children through just a few strokes on a keyboard. Not only are offenders finding vulnerable victims, they're also finding other people who share their depravities. These online communities embolden predators, leading to even more egregious and criminal behavior. The images being produced and distributed on the internet today target even younger children, including infants, with ever more graphic images. Over the past decades, Congress has enacted a number of laws to protect children from exploitation. In 1984, Congress established the creation of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, a nonprofit organization to help prevent child abduction and sexual exploitation, to help find missing children, and to assist victims and their families.
So, Mr. Chairman, notwithstanding that, I am very pleased that you're holding this hearing, and I thank you for the opportunity to say a few words about it. It's a very important hearing on combating crimes against children. Much progress has been made over the past few decades in preventing, investigating, and prosecuting child exploitation crimes, but there is still work to be done. The Bureau of Justice Statistics once reported that 67% of all victims of sexual assault reported to law enforcement agencies were juveniles under the age of 18. 34% of all victims were under age 12. These statistics are unacceptable and are especially frightening in light of the fact that most child sexual abuse goes unreported. It is for this reason we must remain vigilant in protecting the most vulnerable and innocent victims of crimes. Sex offenders will often go to great lengths to get close to children, to gain their trust, and then take advantage of their naivete. That is why it is important that organizations that serve children and which are meant to provide children with mentors can be sure their volunteers and employees do not have a history of predatory behavior. I commend the work of Congressman Bishop and Schiff in introducing the Child Protection Improvements Act, which will give these organizations quick and affordable access to information in FBI databases when conducting background investigations.
Thank you, Chairman Gowdy and Ranking Member Conyers. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to appear before this subcommittee. Child abuse, child exploitation, child sex trafficking, child molestation, child pornography. They all sound a bit clinical for what really happens to children victimized by sex offenders. It is often the forcible rape of little boys and little girls. These acts of violence are captured on film, in stills, and on video. The images themselves encapsulate the crime scene and are the permanent evidence of the crime, the humiliation, the pain, and often the guilt and shame of the child victim. The first trial of my career was of just such a victim, of just such a criminal. A father spent the first 10 years of his precious daughter's life sexually assaulting her, even when she was in diapers. An adorable red-haired little girl we met after she waited years for someone to prosecute her case and save her from her father. Looking into her eyes, I promised her justice. Making my first closing argument to a jury, I trembled, so anxious that I had done everything right for KW, so anxious that they accept my righteous arguments and convict this depraved man. Terrified, really, that they would not convict him and that KW would have to go back to him and endure his assaults. The jury convicted him, and he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. There are so many children who will never get the justice KW did. Child sexual abuse is underreported by as much as 90%. So many children, so much abuse, so much pain, and so many afraid. I used to think the hardest thing I would ever have to do was look into the eyes of a child and listen to her story about being abused. I was wrong. The hardest thing I ever had to do was watch their abuse. Sometimes still photos, sometimes video, sometimes with sound. All heart-wrenching and even now, impossible to forget. I remember all their faces. Sometimes they had a frozen smile. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they screamed. These images included infants and toddlers, also very helpless. Most of them, I would never learn their names, where they lived, or who was hurting them. The struggle to cope, knowing how many are out there even now, will always be with me. No one who has seen these images is untouched by them. I would like to give my heartfelt salute to those analysts, officers, detectives, agents, and prosecutors who today search for these offenders, rescue these children, and endure these images.
Everyone, this is Derek Bros with the Conscious Resistance Network and Activist Post. I'm here at Anarchapulco 2017 for day 2. And I just had the pleasure of speak for the first time in person and meet now Mr. Mac and all the division that takes place. And it's always refreshing to find those who understand that it's not only a battle and the majority of it, I would say, is not in the physical realm, that there's this whole other level to what we're dealing with here, and to see that and to be focused on solutions. So it's refreshing, and I appreciate that. And today, I guess I just wanted to get into a few different topics in your talk that were brought up and mentioned, and I'll start with the most controversial before we bring it to the more personal related to you, and that is the topic of Pizzagate, which is something that myself as a independent freelance investigative journalist, I am always willing to cover the controversial topics, especially whenever you feel this pushback in these certain areas. But I will admit, it took me about a month or so after just hearing this word Pizzagate going around and this and that, until I was like, all right, I'm ready to open up. Let me just sit down, and I made a post on Facebook saying, okay, I'm ready to look into Pizzagate. Give me your best evidence debunking it or showing me where to look at, etc. And of course, I was overwhelmed by people who were really hot on the trail of it by that point. And I ended up doing a video report of my own, just pointing out 2 different areas that I think are probably the strongest, especially for the skeptical. And then we've seen people, journalist Ben Swan, who I've worked with a few times. He's got his reality check segment down in CBS Atlanta on a mainstream station for all intents and purposes, a local station, and he covers Pizzagate. The next day, gets attacked across all the different media. They got pictures of him with a tinfoil hat on. Then he all of a sudden announces he's taking down social media accounts a lot. So there's this pushback. There's people who said they've been threatened once they started to look into certain areas. In your research and for you, I know you mentioned some of the work that you've been drawn to, but what's the strongest point for you? Beyond just that we got the Hillary Clinton emails that are pointing at something. What do you feel is most indicative of this pedophile ring existing, or multiple pedophile rings existing around the world?
Well, look, through my own research, I've discovered it. I know people that work in family services in Australia who've identified at least 20,000 children a year being smuggled into Queensland. But to say where is the evidence? What can we show people? the Clinton emails are very, very good evidence because everything we've been saying and everything that was suggested in Pizzagate is actually in the Clinton emails. It shows just how all pervasive this is. The problem is with Pizzagate is the focus on the pizza store. And I did a show about this where I said, look, watch the psyop aspects of this because the undue focus on the pizza store is going to bring it all undone. And people are saying, oh, yeah, you're trying to cover up pedophilia then. It is left and right, left and right, left and right. There's always controlled opposition to this. But the focus on the pizza store just turns into an attack against a small business. And you suddenly focus on this James Elephantis and not on the pedophile ring. You might think you're focused on the pedophile ring with him, but you're not. You've got to understand that if this guy's got connections to the White House, well, this just confirms the existence of this global pedophile ring, so can we find more? And then you can start looking at the Clinton emails, and you can start looking at so many people who brought these stories out over the years and have said, I was involved, I escaped, mind control, child slavery, sex slaves, the Kathy O'Brien stuff. There's so much stuff, so many people over the years have said this is going on. And everyone said, no, it's just too dark, it couldn't be. Well, there it is in Hillary Clinton's own hand in her emails. And with the connections with the companies, when you look at the connections to the Clinton emails, it basically exposes this network which is manufacturing war all around the world and basically harvesting resources from countries. But when you follow the connection further and keep pulling on the threads, you find out that one of the main resources that they're harvesting from these countries is people. And mainly children and women. And the men are sent to work or organs are harvested, but the children are shipped all around the world to be used in rituals and whatever, and the women are usually sold into prostitution and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's real, it's true, and this pedophile network is happening. What we're living in is a people farm. We really are. We're being farmed. There's a huge network of very, very dark people who are committing the most horrendous atrocities all the time. Just recently in Bulgaria, no, not in Bulgaria, in Denmark or Norway, one of the two countries, there was a pedophile ring exposed. Denmark, 52 people or something arrested, and you find 30 of them are police officers, and the other 22 are all members of parliament and stuff, and all lawyers and connections to this sort of stuff. And there's videos there of children strapped to walls, children being raped by German shepherds, and we're talking 6-year-old kids, 5 and 6-year-old kids and stuff. This is what's going on. This is what's going on right around the world, and it's all pervasive. There's so many means that they do this of entrapment and brownstone operations, getting people involved in sex crimes and all sorts of stuff. So there's so many ways of getting handles on people, and it's just this slippery slope that once you start getting into breaking a few rules and you realise you can get away with it and you realise that everybody else is doing it, it just snowballs, and this is what you end up with. But it's going on behind the scenes, and until we address that, it doesn't matter what sort of remedy we look for. With all of this whole truth freedom movement, it doesn't matter whether it's Bitcoin, doesn't matter whether it's Ubuntu, doesn't matter whether it's the Thrive movement, doesn't matter what it is, if we do not address what is causing this problem and what these people are up to, and we step into our moral compass to call it out, it isn't going to lead anywhere.
I agree.
That is 100%. The only way to remedy. And we have to step into our moral compass. And if we do that, we don't need any other system. We don't need any movement because the world has to change around us organically. You look at it, it has to. If everyone started doing the right thing and all they do, then how can evil exist? When we identify it, call it out and address it. Don't be politically correct about it. Political correctness is a form of tyranny. It's making people shut up and not say what they actually think.
I appreciate what you said there, as far as it seems like once, because the trick seems to be, you get your foot in the door, maybe you think you're going to go into politics and change things or something. Someone kind of lets a little bribe slide here or there, or they get them involved in, maybe they have a prostitute, they get some dirt on them, so in case they ever turn against the syndicate, they can be released and revealed.
It happens all the time, and that's how they do it. They're called brownstone operations. They're constant. And what they do is if they'll send someone into a country with $10,000 and say, okay, take over the country. How do you do it? You get the really rich, influential people, go out, buy them a few drinks, and then you get a prostitute for them. She might be 18, and the next one you get is 16, the next one's 14. And they don't know it, and become friends, and then you get them in a room where they're filmed, having sex with a 14-year-old girl, or even better still, a 14-year-old boy. Then they're yours. You've got them. You've got them. They're in your pocket. Then you say to them, okay, what you do is you find 8 people below you, politicians, and you go out and you get them drunk, and you get them involved, and you film them having sex with a 14-year-old girl, and then you got all of them. And then you get the heads of the police, and you do it with them. You're going to need a couple of people. They've just got to be in key positions.
Yeah.
And then you've got this stuff on them. And they do this by crushing our sexuality in this society. I mean, sex is as natural as sleeping, eating, or breathing. It's something that we all do, but we don't talk about it. It's taboo, it's nasty.
And that's where we wanted to leave it off at, because for obvious reasons there's so many different sides to this issue, primarily because there's a couple factors here. Something I hope I really emphasize as people tear into these articles, that there are all types of people involved. Obviously the victim primarily, the secondary victims, and obviously the offender. In a lot of cases, you have to look that there's a lot more going on. Initially, when we hear about a victim, we're looking at a couple things. We're looking at the circumstances around it, especially when it involves blackmail, because to me, there are layers to this. I've tried to say this before. So I don't want anybody just throwing out accusations till the full story is thoroughly vetted. Unfortunately, now you're hearing that there are members of law enforcement. This is where it gets real hairy. It's really important the victims are rescued and that there are answers to recovery. If we can emphasize on awareness and recovery, the world is going to be a different place. I'm saying this from experience. I walked in on it at 14 years old. We went to court. We went through the prosecution part of it initially. A lot of people got hurt that did not need to get hurt. A lot of people innocently trying to help get hurt. And I cannot emphasize how important this is. I see too many people that are just not willing to listen to what we're saying. And unfortunately, I can't make them listen. I can't make people listen to these posts. Okay? It's a lot of people. They won't realize it until the damage is done. So I emphasize, when these things get thoroughly vetted and the law enforcement's doing their job, and this is why they call it internal investigations, because now you're hearing case after case now. Just recently, this case in Louisville, involving the Metro Police. 2 members of the police officer are involved in raping a young boy. So that's why we say, please don't jump the gun. Before you just nosedive and start picking out who's who, please know there's so much more involved in these cases. I can't emphasize that anymore. It's that important. I would rather just leave the case here until we start learning more at these subcommittee hearings too. Thank you for listening.